Welcome to another episode of Fight the Burnout. Today we have a chief of police from King County Sheriff's Office, and he's going to talk to us about his last 34 years. Before I introduce him, before I hand it over to him, remember this episode is brought to you by Create From Why. Here we make sure that your mental health is taken care of, and we interview people from all over the world so that you can learn from them and their experience so you don't have to go through it yourself. So grab that pen, grab that piece of paper, take one thing away, and make sure you implement it in. You can always come back and listen. So without further ado, Troy, um, Chief of Police, Division Chief is what I have here for the King County Sheriff's Department. As I always like to do, Troy, I like to let you take it away because you know yourself way better than I can read your bio and everything like that. So why don't you tell us about who you are, where you started, and how you got to where you are now?
Okay, Troy Olmsted, Division Chief for Criminal Investigations, King County Sheriff's Office. Almost 25 years with King County. I started 9 years before that with Maricopa County Sheriff's Office in Phoenix, Arizona. And I also served 5 years in the United States Air Force. As far as I'm kind of what we consider legacies. That's what we in King County refer to as sons and daughters or family members of law enforcement. So my father was a police officer at a local agency here for only about a year, but I was very young at the time, and I always remembered that. And then he moved from law enforcement to security at Boeing, and one of the reasons he did was because Boeing paid more, and you still had to have a partial commission. And since he had one, he just went. So yeah, yesterday, October 10th, was actually my anniversary of start date 34 years ago down in Arizona. So yeah, it's been I cannot believe how fast it's gone. I've had a lot of fun with this job. I think it should be fun. And which one of the reasons that I think it's going to be good talking to you, because if this job isn't fun for you anymore, there's something wrong.
Yeah. There's something that you've taken an exit somewhere that's made it so it's not fun. And so let's talk about. We're going to talk today. I believe we're going to talk today about how to get you back onto the freeway of fun in this job if you're off of it, or keep you on it so you don't take that exit of where so many cops these days, especially, are ending up. Okay, so tell me about the Air Force. I want to hear about the Air Force. What was the Air Force like?
So I was on the other side. So before I got into law enforcement, there was a time when I was in high school when I decided I was going to be a firefighter. And so I joined the Air Force, and I was a firefighter. So yeah, I was a chili cooker for for a hot second there, and I really enjoyed it. I still am great friends with a number of people that I served with. Got to spend time overseas, and that's what landed me in Arizona. It was a really good experience, and I learned a lot that actually has helped me in this career. And but I knew that being a firefighter, after I did it for the first 3 years or so, I knew it wasn't what I was going to do for the rest of my life. It wasn't my calling.
How'd you know that?
Um, I as because firefighters are probably going to hate me for giving out the secret. Fighting fires was great, but they've kind of worked themselves out of a job because of all the fire prevention that they do. And we would go to car accidents and do things, so there was the exciting moments, but the majority of the calls, and I suppose it's it's probably true with us too. You know, you get a lot of the mundane calls, but I just I just got tired of all the medical calls. You know, Mrs. Fletcher, I've fallen, I can't get up, and I I needed something different back. And it, you know, law enforcement was something I grew up around, and my dad and his best friend, and uh, so it was just something I was around, and I knew that that's probably where I needed to be, and it
No,
was.
that's awesome. The reason I ask is because I know there's so many people out there that are like, that might be on that kind of fence of maybe law enforcement they feel isn't right for them. So really being able to be clear about that is pretty precise. So you know when you're confident in your decisions of what to do. So you moved to Phoenix. Did you have to pay for academy on your own back then?
No, Arizona is much like Washington. You get hired and they put you through the academy. So I know there's a lot of states where you self-sponsor, but the western half of the United States is generally not self-sponsor. California does have a little bit of self-sponsor, but most of the other agencies are, if they're post or like Washington, the agencies sponsor.
So you decided, so what, obviously, I think I know the answer to this, but I want to hear it from you. What made you decide, okay, law enforcement is going to be the place that I'm going to go and not sales or not corporate, or I'm going to go from fire to law enforcement and be the one that doesn't sleep at night?
Well, again, it was pretty much growing up around it, between my father and his friend who was a police sergeant from a local agency. Um, uh, and so, interesting side story on that. Where I went to high school, we went back and kind of did a little survey. We For about a 5 year period out of my high school, you go to high school and you find one or two guys are in law enforcement. I think we counted over about a 5 or 6 year span, about 15 or 16 guys who went into law enforcement. So up until about four years ago, three guys that I went to high school with were with King County. Two of us are still here. Um, I probably know six or seven former and current Seattle police officers that I went to high school with, and then there's a few others scattered around different agencies. My one of my best friends, we've known each other since fifth grade. We both went into law enforcement. He served with the county north of King County, which is Snohomish County, and he retired a couple years ago. So I don't know what it was, around something in the water, some television show we were watching. I don't know what it was, but a whole lot of us happened to go into the business.
Yeah, awesome. So you're there for how long were you in Phoenix for?
9 years.
9 years. You're there for 9 years. What brought you back to King County?
So this is around the Seattle area is where I grew up, and so my wife and I, she was a little bit tired of the heat,
Fair enough.
and her folks were moving to California, so our kids weren't going to have grandparents near them, and family's a real important thing to us, and I said, well, no offense, but I said, I'm not moving to California. I said, we can either stay here or we can move back, or we can go to Washington. She hadn't lived here before. I said, or we can go to Washington and be closer to my parents, and the kids can be around grandparents more. And, you know, we just, I happened to be up here on vacation and took the test when I was here and made the switch.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yes, I can agree with the not moving to California thing being from there. So great state, but just too much other stuff going on. Okay, so you did that, and you've been in King County since, and you've worked your way all the way up. I saw, and you even said, and you've worked your way all the way up from sergeant. Well, all the way up, obviously from the bottom, but in King County it was all the way up from sergeant, wasn't it, or was it patrol there too to start with?
No, yeah, I started as a patrol deputy. I started here in December of 1997, and so I came in and I started. As soon as I had enough time on, they immediately just. I was a trainer when I was in Arizona, field training officer, so I moved right into training. I loved being part of the training program. Trained a lot of people. That was always a priority of mine. Then a master police officer, and then so between Arizona and King County, I spent about 17 years just doing patrol, and then I became a sergeant, and then just kind of moved up from there.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. So you've had a real good career, a real good foundation with that base. Before we jump over into kind of, experiences during your career, what would you define burnout as, Troy?
I think it's different. I think we can generalize it. I think we all kind of can identify, okay, this is, especially if we're not identifying ourselves, you can point to somebody and say, they're burned out. That person's burned out. You can just tell, right? The different things, whether or not they're engaged, if they're disgruntled, if they're unhappy. We you can name the police department, and I don't care where it is, and everybody will point to the person. They'll say, "Oh yeah, that they're just like that." Well, they probably weren't always just like that. Um, but it's somebody who's worn down, and trauma are long-term trauma events, and like the PTSD and things like that can cause very similar things, but just the burnout of, every day you're doing the job. Sometimes you feel like it's, thankless. You just get caught up in these things, and there are these traps that people get into, basically, and sometimes you fail to recognize them right away. And some people do, and some people avoid them and do a good job. And again, everybody's different, so it there's a different ways to get out of it for everybody, just like how everybody is different how they got into it.
Yeah, definitely. So Troy, tell us a little bit about well, what's your when I ask you, tell me about an experience that you've had with burnout. What pops into your head?
Um, you know, what pops into my head is um, probably, and again, it's probably fallen into these traps where you're going to work all the time. When we start the job, you can't hardly pry it away from us, right? It's all about work. I want to be at work. I want to do this. I want to have this fun. I want to have this excitement. This is great stuff. I love this stuff. And then you start hanging around other people who are kind of the same way, but then you're all talking to each other, talking about the same thing, and it just kind of becomes old, and you're like, what, do I really want to go to work today? Is this what it's about? People can find themselves in that, and um, I I feel like I've done a fairly good job personally of recognizing those things over time. Um, for me, it was never so much burnout. I probably I probably faced more of the issues that cause burnout after promoting into leadership,
Mm.
these higher roles, than I ever did working patrol. Now I know a lot of people can have that working patrol, but working the road, or dealing with that, or being a sergeant, I never had those issues. I know I had some trauma issues, but not really a burnout. It's more when the weight of carrying, um, you know, uh, gosh, I'm in charge of all these people, and I'm carrying that burden, and how do I fix these things or get these people to do these things, and those things for me are probably were more of an issue than anything in the first 25 years.
Have you had any time where you're like, okay, I need to, as leadership, because I know you're not the first person that I've talked to, at the chief level or even at the captain level, or even, in between, that has had that. They're like, street, I was totally good, and then I promoted. And they're like, and then that's when I started, I don't care what cop you are, you join the job, at a surface level to help people. And so when you start to see your people that, now you get to the stage where you're at, where you're not so much working with the people on the street, you're working with the cops on the street, and you're trying to do and implement things in so that they are better, so that they have better resources, so that they're taken care of, also so that then they can impact the street with the end goal. Have you had a time where you're like, okay, I need to recharge, or what have you done to make sure that you don't end up down that deep dark spiral of burnout at your leadership level?
Yeah. So for me, we had a change of leadership here about a year ago, and I found that I was at a point where I was like, okay, I don't know, maybe I've just about had enough of this stuff. I was just kind of holding on, waiting to see what was going to happen with our new sheriff and things like that, and of course, everybody was feeling the effects of COVID and George Floyd and defund the police, and there was a lot of things going on, and so we had a lot of issues to try and figure out, and I got COVID myself, and it was a tough couple of weeks, being at home, not being able to do much of anything, and I kind of decided, so I was doing a little bit of research on the COVID and different things, and I decided, okay, I've kind of let myself go a little bit here, put on a few pounds, probably having a drink during the week when I probably should just wait for a weekend, and then I just said, okay, I need to just stop and get myself back on a fitness routine. And so for the past year, I've been working hard, and I've been very diligent about my fitness for the last year, and I think that's really helped me this last year, getting back into good shape. And I think there's plenty of scientific evidence, and I think we all know it's true. I don't think there's any denying it. When you're in better shape, you handle things better. You're more resilient. Your mind works better. It all kind of ties together. There's no denying it. Now, we can kid ourselves and we can try and fool ourselves, but I think we all know, if you don't do something with your fitness, you're going to pay a price for it at some point, right?
No, I love that. I love that you said fitness. I mean, my story of burnout, going through all of my burnout and in the police and my 7.5 years of policing, I was, even before that, crazy fitness person. And the times when I wasn't training hardcore and I wasn't training a lot, is where my mental side would kind of dip. Even to this day, we had a big lockdown here the end of last year that happened, and went into it with a hip injury, so I couldn't even go for runs or anything. I couldn't use the gym because they were all closed. And again, it dipped everything. And it's so true. Why do you think we see the SWAT boys in the gym every single chance they get? So they can keep their mind clear. Also, so they can look good. But it's majorly so that that mind stays clear. The more fit you are, the more the mind stays clear. So I love that you said that. Now I know that you had said that you had some trauma stuff that has happened over your 34 years of policing. You can't have trauma being a cop after 30. You can't say that that you have never had trauma in a 34-year career, because yeah, you're kidding yourself, I think, if you say you never have, even after a
Oh yeah.
year. um, are you open to talking to us a little bit about some of those traumatic experiences, maybe the top few that you've had, or the top one?
Well, certainly the top one. I mean, I could talk about any of them. I try and always be an open book about them. There's, uh, you know, m- most. I can't say most. I don't want to speak for all police officers, but a number of police officers will always remember, giving CPR to a small child, or something along that lines, or even an elderly person, and have it not be successful, unfortunately. But if it is successful, that's fantastic. Um, Probably my most impactful thing was in 1995. My partner was killed in the line of duty. So Ken Blair, we were interesting story about Ken. So when I got stationed at Luke Air Force Base outside of Phoenix, Ken was the first sergeant of one of the areas that I was being assigned to. He retired from the Air Force about, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks or a month before I got assigned there. So I never met him at that point. And he became a deputy for the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. So when I got out of the Air Force, then I signed on for the sheriff's office there. And then I met him, and we got to talking one day, and he's like, "Oh, I was the first sergeant for that unit," and I was like, "Oh, that's funny," And so it was kind of, we were going to meet one way or the other, I guess.
Yeah.
So, but we were partners, patrol partners for 2 or 3 years out in a fairly rural area, working swing shift together. Then Ken went into patrol, or into detectives. And I moved back into a different area patrol of the county. And then he rolled out of detectives and was assigned back to patrol. And because he was senior to me by about a year, he bumped me out of my beat. and literally, I don't know, within 2 or 3 weeks, maybe less, of him taking over that beat, he was, we were dispatched to a domestic violence. And so it's always one of those things where Murphy's Law. So the sheriff's office was having a 911 upgrade, and all of our calls were actually, the call center was actually going to the city of Phoenix, and then they'd have to contact us to dispatch us while they were getting the phone system upgraded.
Massive delay
So
then.
we're at a little bit of a lag time. So more irony in this. So the apartment complex that he gets dispatched to is literally a 5-minute walk from the gate of the Air Force Base that he retired from and I worked at. Most of the people who lived in this apartment complex were tied to the base, probably 90% of them. So we would go to DVs there. It wasn't uncommon, but it's always arguments, and, because the people in the military, they pretty much understand, right? If you get popped off base, they're gonna bust you on base too, right?
Yep.
There's
You're
no
gonna,
such
you're gonna
thing as
get double
double
hit. You're
jeopardy.
gonna get double hit, and yeah, it's not gonna be fun
Exactly.
on
There's
base.
no
It's gonna be
double
worse on
jeopardy.
base than out of base.
Right. So anyway, he gets dispatched. We get dispatched. I was probably 10 minutes away. He arrived and put himself on scene. Was going to make contact, and they start asking, "What's your status? What's your status?" Other phone calls coming in saying, something bad happened here, and so I was the second one on scene after Ken, and but a guy and his wife had an argument. Airman, he was an airman. He'd been to some sort of a squad party that day. had been drinking when Ken knocked on the door. And now I'll back up and also say Ken was very serious about his officer safety. And for us, it really is kind of out of the norm, not kind of out of the norm. It's very out of the norm to, approach a DV call by yourself, right? We want to have that second. And I don't know what was going through his head, but I know for me, I'm thinking, oh, it's this apartment complex. It's, again, you think of these things. Maybe he thought that, maybe he thought somebody was gone. But anyway, female opens the door. He apparently asked her a question or two. She stepped back into the apartment a couple steps. He took a couple steps in, and the guy came from around the corner with an SKS and just shot him right there, and not a chance to return fire or anything. So, and then he turned the gun on himself. So then he shot himself. So that's what I came into when I got there, and so it's pretty powerful on you for something like that. And so this is 1995, and we weren't doing a lot of critical incident debriefs and things like that. We did what cops did. We got together and we went to the bar and we drank ourselves silly after that. I mean, it's just it seemed normal for us to do that, right? But it was a coping mechanism for that. But that was that day, and then it's not like the drinking continued, but that's just what we knew at the time, right?
Yeah.
We didn't have a lot of the tools that we're using now with if something like that were to happen to us, we would immediately have that person with a peer support, somebody with peer support training, and they would be immediately on administrative leave, and they would be with a mental health professional having a discussion, and then we'd have our CASD, right? These are all these great things that we've learned over time. Unfortunately, like a lot of things, like everything in your policy book, we learn them because of probably a bad experience, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I do remember we did have a critical incident stress debrief for this, but for almost everybody in that room, it's the first time anybody had ever even heard it. So nobody was really familiar with it or how it was supposed to be, and it really wasn't. I think because it was so familiar to everybody, it probably wasn't effective as it could have been. Again, if you've been through them before, or somebody knew how to run it properly, probably may have helped more. But we were still there. We participated. And there not everything that came out of this was bad. So our dispatcher for that day is a very close friend of mine to this day. So we still have regular contact and talk. And she just retired this year, and so we're very close. So that there can be some positives, right? You have to find your positives.
Definitely have to. What did you learn? Like, what did you take away from that situation? Well, actually, first, how did you process the trauma of that incident? Like, not necessarily the trauma of turning up to it, but like the trauma around all of it. Like, how did you process it so that it hasn't destroyed you over the last 30 odd years?
Probably not as well as I could have. I mean, again, from looking back on that perspective, I know that I just buried a lot of that, compartmentalized it, right? But I also know, looking back, there's probably a lot of survivor's guilt. Man, he took my beat. Why why didn't he wait for me? Why,
Yeah.
all these things, and of course you talk with the people that you're close to around all our my squad members, and they're like, yeah, if you were there, you're probably dead too. Who knows, right? Well, maybe, maybe not, right? So, um, but I just think over time, um, I think just, being open about talking about the situation with people, and just, putting it out there, and just letting people ask me questions about it, and talking about the facts. And I think that was a big help for me to process it. When I started over in King County, from Arizona, um, I I talked to an academy class about the whole event, and though I think those things just help you over time process it. And I think if I'd have kept it buried and not talked about it, it probably would have been a lot worse.
No, I guarantee it would have been a lot worse. Um, but okay, so I know back then, because I've talked to a lot of people that policed in the '90s, some even in the '80s, and it was a very much of a you just don't say how you're feeling, you just kind of suck it up, buttercup, and carry on. Why do you feel you were different and you actually talked about it?
Well, I, I'm gonna touch on something that you said before we started this about, planting the seed and thinking about something that, you might tell somebody. Uh, so I'll start with that. One of the things that I tell all of our new people that are coming out of the academy, or when I see them, or, sometimes going in, I tell them it's it's really important, in my opinion, that if you have friendships and relationships outside of law enforcement, keep them.
Hmm.
Because when I'm not, I don't, I think everybody should have friends that are cops or whatever, but I think it's very important to keep the outside touch. Because if you exclusively surround yourself with other cops, it's one of those trap things. Because you talk about work, you talk about what's good at work, what was exciting about work, what sucks about work, who you hate at work. It's just the call you went on at work, the call they went on at work, and it all just becomes this. It's so cyclical. If you have and maintain the relationships of friends that aren't in law enforcement, then again, this is just my thought process. When they come to you and say, "Hey, man, I watched this George Floyd thing. This was screwed up. This was this. This was that." You you may find yourself saying, "Okay, I need to find a way to get them to understand a different perspective. They've got the news. They're seeing the news. They're getting all these opinions, and a lot of them don't come from a law enforcement perspective, right? And whatever it is, even if they saw the bank robbery on TV, or a car crash, or maybe they even experienced a traffic stop with somebody, they're going to ask you questions. And you know, to me, it's important to, you know, walk them through a process and get them to understand why decisions may have been made, why certain things would happen. But when you're with a bunch of your buddies, it's just like, oh, that's bullshit. I'd have done this, right?
Yeah.
But you don't tell your mom the story that way, right? You walk her through the process, and so I think that's an important thing. So back to your original question, I think that my support system, inside and outside of law enforcement, because I had a lot of good relationships within my agency, that helps me. But having those solid family foundations and friendships outside of law enforcement helped me keep perspective.
How many years into the job were you when this happened, if you don't mind me asking?
It would have been 7 years in.
So 7 years in. So you're well and truly into the career. Now I know it's I know I was given that same speech of keep your friends outside the police because you don't want to be totally surrounded by police. And now I realize after doing a whole bunch of work that you become the average of the 7 people you hang around with the most. So if that's going to be cops, you're going to become however those 7 cops are. And so, I reiterate this with people that I talk to as well that are just getting into law enforcement or in it. But why do you think that you actually did that? Because I know so many cops, they get a couple years in and they go, oh, everybody doesn't understand me, or whatever that psyche ends up being. And all they do is want to hang out with cops because they understand them.
Yeah, maybe a big dose of luck. Um, well, so my, I, I talked about some of the relationships that I had when I was in the Air Force and maintained those. So, uh, I have two really close friends that I served with. One that I served with overseas, and one that I served with when I was at Luke Air Force Base. Um, neither one of them went into law enforcement, but they were an important part of my life, and we maintained friendships, and so that was part of it. They stayed close. One of my best friends up here, I said before, was in law enforcement, uh, and our relationship is probably different because we've known each other so long, right? We've known each other since we were snotty-nosed kids in elementary school, right? So when we get together and talk, yeah, we can talk cop stuff, but we got each other's dirty secrets all the way through teenage, and so we can give each other crap for a lot of things that didn't happen in law enforcement, and the conversations can revolve around anything. So that one's a little bit different than a relationship that you make with an officer, say a friend in the academy, or your first patrol partners, or whatever. So luck of the draw, blessed. I don't know. It worked out that way.
Did you find that they reached out to you a lot and wanted to hang out as well?
Uh, yeah. Well, so for so here's the interesting story. The friend that I served with in Arizona, uh, he introduced me to my wife. So my wife and his current wife, uh, they were roommates, and he met his wife and then introduced me to mine on a blind date. And so we also have that connection. So our wives are close friends, and we were friends, and so that just maintained. So we were always going to be connected and doing stuff, and those things helped. And we were also part of the same church, and so we had other people that we were close to, and I think that I know religion's not important to everyone, but I think it has a place for a lot of people, and I think those might be very helpful to people who experience things like that. There's all kinds of places to reach out, but sometimes your church family is very important.
Did you find because I'm quite intrigued on the whole, I believe in it completely to keep people outside the police and that, but I also know that the conversation can a lot of times be like, they get almost that living vicariously through you because you're a cop and they're like, oh my god, it sounds so exciting, and they see the cop shows and they do all that kinds of different stuff, and so they live vicariously through you, whether it's because they are like, hey, I could never do that, and they respect it, or but the conversations, did you find that they would be that the people outside of the police would ever ask you about policing, or was it just that they wanted to just hang around you and that? Because I know, again, we talk about that proximity of people around you. If the I know a lot of my friends I'd get together with them and be like, oh, tell me some cool police stories and all this and that. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about it. I'm not there.
Yeah, I think I've been, again, really blessed in that regard, because the group of friends I had were friends of mine, before
Before
I got
policing.
into the business. And so, yeah, they want to know a story, or they want to know about something or whatever, but you know, but they also know me as a person, and they could call BS on something if they wanted to, or they just, I didn't get a lot of that. And I think, I don't know. It's, again, I think sometimes it's just a good thing to say, yeah, I'm not really talking about that today. What's the football game on? Let's talk about this. What's the rivalry of, we got other things we're gonna do. And again, uh, our families grow up together. We got kids, we got birthday parties, we got other things, and so there's just sometimes too many other things going on. So I'll circle it back. I feel like I was really lucky in that regard, and I know that is not the case for everyone.
Mm.
And but that's why I really try and stress it to the new people about keeping these relationships from before, because especially if you're around a lot of family and friends, and you have those relationships where all these other things in life are going on that also have a priority, you can always, at least you have the opportunities to reset your priorities away from work. These are my family things that I got to do here.
No, it's so important to shift those priorities, shift that, as I call it, the focus. Shift that mental state, that mental mindset of where you're focused on. When you leave work, leave work. Yes, you need to talk about it, and yes, you need to let it go. Tell your partner, tell your significant other, kind of some of the stuff that's going on, not in detail, but just so that they understand. Hey, I had a crap day at work, and this is what happened. But no, I love that you hit that lucky thread of just having all the stars align on that side, because it sounds like it's paid off. With your current role, obviously, like you said, you talk to new recruits and that a lot, and you tell them to make sure they have friends that friends and call and that outside of policing. What are some of the things like the King County or that yourself that you make sure that the people that work with you or that you lead, because I feel like you're, and we'll follow you on LinkedIn and stuff like that, I feel like you're a bit more of a leader than a manager. Uh, the people that you lead, what do you do to make sure that their mindset stays uplifting, that they don't get affected by all the traumas of the job, and they don't burn out? What are some of the key things that you instill with them?
Yeah, so that's a really important piece. And there's always the it's important for me not to be a micromanager, right? So I have captains and sergeants, and those first line supervisors that I think is probably the sergeants that work for me. We have our staff meetings, and I think it's really important that they have their finger on the pulse of their people. And so when they tell me, hey, chief, this person is been really impacted, or they've got stuff going on in their personal life, or whatever, we're going to lighten their load, right, for a little bit. The other people in the unit know it, and they want to help, and they're gonna take the call, the weekend calls, so this person doesn't have to this cycle, or things like that. And trying to keep your finger on the pulse, when you're elevated into command level, you're also separated a lot from seeing sometimes the impact that you have on people. So you really have to rely on your managers in between. And so I don't think enough can be stressed about, having your managers, they should know, my captains need to know my sergeants, and they need to know, how they're doing. And then the sergeants need to know how the detectives are doing, and how they're operating. And we want to make accommodations when we can. Uh, I don't want to say it's a business, but business still needs to happen, right? And most people are absolutely willing to take on uh, some additional stuff in order to help out a colleague, right? It's one of their squad mates. They just know, and I at least I found that to be generally true. And we've done a lot. Again, more recently in the last few years than we ever have in the past about resilience and encouraging people to find that life and work balance. And I'm in charge of the homicide robbery unit, and they're some of the busiest people that we have. And I know that this job has got to be completely taxing on them. So so it was a holiday weekend for us in King County, and I didn't get one page saying, oh, they had two major calls on Friday, but they didn't have any over the weekend. Well, that made me feel a lot better when I got to work this morning, knowing that, okay, nobody got called out over the weekend. That's fantastic. They caught a break. Not that, Friday wasn't a huge day and we were stretched really thin, but it's important to manage all those things and get people to understand what their limits are, and ask for help if you need it, and just have opportunities for them to make the identification on their own that they just need a break, and or have our supervisors be aware enough to say, you need a break.
Sometimes calling a spade a spade. Uh, how do you make sure that your captains and your sergeants and that are making sure that they do have their fingers on the pulse? How do you make sure that train keeps ticking? I know you've got a lot of moving parts at your level. How do you make sure that train keeps ticking so that everybody below you in rank is doing the best that they possibly can?
Well, you know, I,
Put you on the
I'm
spot
sure
there.
there's people that are better at it. I'm sure there's people that are better at it than I am. But I have a lot of faith and trust in my people, and I so in the criminal investigations division portion of all the things that I have, these detectives and these sergeants don't get there because they're slouches. Yeah. they're there because of their work ethic and their knowledge and everything. So much like, so I also have the SWAT team, right? The people that come to the units in the criminal investigation division, I always refer to as the A team. They're driven people, whether they're my air support, my bomb unit, the TAC guys, Marine unit, all these detectives that I have, they truly are the best, and they want to perform and succeed. And again, it's not that they don't burn out or won't face burnout or have these things, but I think that we're doing a better job, across law enforcement in general. But I know I can say for King County, we're being more aware and focusing in more on these issues at every level. And so I know the information and the training that my staff gets, the supervisors, and I got to trust that they're doing the right thing. And I haven't been disappointed yet. I mean, they let me know, and we have discussions about it, and because when it gets really busy, I hear it. We're super busy. We needed some breaks, and I'm like, I know, I need to get some more people, but You know,
It's good that they communicate it. So how do you make sure that because I know that's one of the biggest things that around the world that people say is that, people get to the top and they change who they are, or we never hear from them again. How do you make sure that, that everybody knows that you're there and that it sounds like your door's open? How do you make sure that everybody knows who Troy is?
well, that is a challenge always. I think for everybody who gets into the executive level, it's not always an easy thing to be seen and known and let your people know. Um, I think that a lot of the acknowledgement on sometimes the little things, like awards are pretty important to me, accommodations, and if people get like a commander's award, a meritorious service award, I do my best to go out and give it to them personally.
Mm.
I don't like to send that out to other supervisors to give it to them. I want to be there and show my appreciation. Um, I do keep my office door open. People walk by and say hi. Sometimes they'll stick their head in and say, "You got a minute?" I will absolutely try and give them the time if I have it. Sometimes you have other obligations or meetings and you can't. And if I have one, I typically close my door, and so people know if the door's closed, well, but and then one of the things I learned that I try to utilize, you've probably heard the term management by walking around. uh, Sometimes you got to get your butt out of the chair and walk through the office and just see who's there and just take a second to say hey. And two things you accomplish by that: one is you get to engage with your people, and two is you're kind of walking away from your stressors for a second, right? You're taking the all that off of yourself and just hey, how are you doing? How what can I do for you? Is there anything I can do for you? So you're changing that focus for a second. So it's a twofold thing, which is what I've kind of convinced myself of this management by walking around. It's good. It's as good for you as it is for everybody else to see you.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. Last question I have before we kind of wrap up, because I'm actually quite intrigued, and I've gotten so much good information. I've taken so many notes and all of this. So for the listeners in that, I guarantee you got something out of today. Troy, how do you disconnect? How through your 34 years, what tools have you used? Give us like, I don't know, 1 to 3 that you've used to disconnect from work to home life, so you don't become the cop who takes work home. And I know as a
Well,
leader, it's probably even harder in different ways.
I'm gonna recommend a book
Uh-huh.
here to everybody, and it's a little bit of an older one, but um, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement by Dr. Kevin Gilmartin. An absolute must read. See, I've got a copy on my shelf too. So
Mine's sitting right here because I
I'm
need to
really
give it to
glad.
somebody.
I've lent my copy out many times. I'm glad you have that. I've had the chance to meet him. I've had his class. A lot of that was real eye opener to me. My oldest son is also a deputy with our agency. He's been on for 15 years. I made him read the book and go to the class. I learned a lot from what he has to say, right? That disconnect time on the drive home, like separating yourself and just having these moments. For us in King County, we're lucky in the fact that we have take-home cars, and we're also burdened with the fact that we have take-home cars because you're on duty till you get in your driveway. Basically, you can't completely turn it off. Which when I was in Arizona and I didn't have a take-home car, when we left the office, you could kind of start that de-stress.
You take that
I'm
vest
just
off,
in
and you
my
put it in your
personal
locker, and
tunnel.
it's done.
Right. So now you need to have that decompression, that time to turn your, yellow orange down to, down to the green zone. And so I think he has some really good tips in there to help people, uh, find your switches and kind of, you know, um, prepare or decompress, right? So that drive into work, you're getting yourself ready. That drive home, you're kind of decompressing. You're putting that stuff aside. And what he talks about, I think was helpful for me. And I'll go back to something that I talked about earlier, which is everybody's a little bit different. And what I took out of that book might be a little bit different than what you took out of it. And what helps me might not be exactly for you. But everybody needs to find their own, their own way to cope and deal with it. It's not, it's not a one size fits all. It's just not.
No, no. No, I love that. I love that, Troy. Well, thanks so much for everything today. Just a couple things. If somebody is looking, I know King County at the time of this recording, I believe you guys are hiring at the moment. I think I saw something saying you guys are hiring, or is that expired already?
No, we continue to hire all the time. We're open for new hires and laterals. We've got bonuses for both. I believe that we're going to have a new contract in place for our deputies. Their labor agreements should be done and all wrapped up here very soon, if not already. I don't have that information completely solid yet, but sounds like that's what's going to happen. So pushed everybody, could push everybody back up on the scale again for a little higher pay. So that's always a good thing. People might have been waiting for that, but
Nice.
yeah. And I'll just say that having worked at a couple agencies now, a lot of places are the same. The grass isn't always greener on the other side, but I think our grass is pretty good for the most part here. So if you're looking to come over, come check it out.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I know you can be found on LinkedIn. If somebody wants to, get in touch with King County or even yourself, how do they go about doing that?
You can look King County Sheriff's Office. We got all kinds of links for hiring, the new hire process, the lateral process. You can just go right to the web, search King County Sheriff and King County Sheriff jobs, and it'll get you right where you need to go.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. The only last question I always like to ask for as we wrap up is, what would you say your top tip to self-happiness is?
Ooh, top tip to self-happy. I wish you would have given me this one as the precursor. You kind of touched on it when you talked about the finding your why and your purpose, and I think those are important. My family's important to me. My wife and I, we raised 4 kids. They're all happy, productive adults, which was what we wanted. That I think that for me, family is a huge thing. I think that's probably one of the things that keeps me grounded in this too.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. Thank you, Troy. Any last words before we wrap up completely?
I hope someday I can get back to New Zealand. I spent 17 days there and loved it. Would love to go back.
Well, if you do come over, just let me know. I'll show you around. So perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Troy. Thanks so much, Troy, for your time today. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. Make sure you like and subscribe. Remember, this episode is brought to you by Create From Why, and currently at the time of this recording, we are running a retreat next year near actually where Troy used to police for quite a while. So near out of Sedona, and we're going to be 6 days on motorcycles, learning how to not burn out, how to recharge, and how to make it stick. So if you're interested in that, links are down in the description. Come follow us there. And till next time, remember, just take one thing out of this. run with it. 1% every day change is massive by the end of the year. And yeah, remember, my motto is train hard, test easy, because at the end of the day, we're always going to be tested. So if we're training hard, both physically and mentally, then those tests will be that much easier. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next one.